Villainy Inks have arrived at the Dark Ages Workshop studio. Zatcaskagoon asked me to make an honest, unbiased review of the entire set. So I tried them immediately, and I won't lie. My very first impression almost killed him. But what I discovered after a couple more painting sessions convinced me that these enamel colors would change the way we paint. These miniatures are my test models, with just primer, a couple of base colors, and Villainy Inks. No undershade, no oils, no highlights, no varnishes, no strange rocket science glue techniques, nothing. Stay with me in the video to see it for yourself, as I give you my honest review on Villainy Inks, test them on these models, and tell you my experience and discoveries. So I can tell you right away that these paints are unlike any other enamel paint. At first, I was stubbornly trying to use them like other well-known brands that we all use in the Grimdark style. And I just couldn't see the true potential until I changed my mentality and approach. They vary in consistency, application, coverage, and so many other things. They have a little bit learning curve, as they need to be applied mindfully, more like acrylic washes. So I'll start by giving you a couple of recommendations and insights to start using Villainy Inks in the best way. First thing you want to do is shake them vigorously. The dropper bottle is an awesome and welcome addition, but you have to make sure to unload the pipette and squeeze it nicely all the way to free all the paint that's stuck inside, and then give it a second shake. Second, they work best when you mix them with your regular mineral spirits. Now, you can indeed apply Villainy Inks straight out of the bottle with no added solvent. However, these paints are quite thick. They are suspended in a medium that is much more gentle and mild than the usual industrial grade solvent, so they dry slowly like oils, and generally they dry satin. So what you want to do is mix Villainy Inks with regular mineral spirits to give them the kick that they need in order to dry much faster, and will help them dry matte. I take these tin cups, and I usually start by adding a couple of brushfuls of mineral spirits into the Villainy Inks and stir with my brush until the mixture is nicely unified and broken down. Now, a couple of item recommendations. I advise you to get yourself a blow dryer to speed up the dry time and have a fast and efficient painting process. Last but not least, Villainy Inks are non-toxic to breathe, and they don't emit strange smells or evaporate easily in thin air. However, since you're going to work with mineral spirits, you will need a mask and protective gloves. So with this out of the way, I'll just say that I'm not a salesman, and I don't want to sound like one. I will give my honest criticism. But in the meantime, for this video, I will present to you two main very simple tests. The first will consist of a manual application just with brushes. We'll cover all the paints in the range and use them as intended with mineral spirits and the reductive technique. While the second test will see the use of Villainy Inks through an airbrush, and we'll see what we can achieve with that. So now let's get right into it. I'll use a bunch of test models here, just primed in a couple coats of Steinred's Grey primer, and come with a zenithal pass of white primer. I apply very simple base colors, ranging from browns, cream, black, greens and reds manually. I give these about 20 minutes to dry, and no varnish is applied. Let's start with Goon's Grime, the one I'm most excited for. I get about 6 drops in my tin cup and add a couple of brushfuls of regular mineral spirits, thinning it down and mixing until everything is nicely unified. This will aid the enamel wash to dry faster and matte, and run smooth on the surfaces. Goon's Grime feels like the typical enamel wash that we can simply apply on very easily for instant results. I let this dry with a blow dryer real quick, and you see it dries matte. One end damp with mineral spirits, and I start dissolving the wash to reveal the color beneath. It feels very smooth and doesn't take any effort or pressure. I let this dry again and come back to reinforce some recesses in very deliberate small passes to create some darker shadows. So, if we want to create blends, we can just use a dry Q-tip and simply slide across the surfaces. If we instead want to reveal more of the white beneath, we use the other end, damp with mineral spirits. Goon's Grime feels great to use so far. The color is excellent for general purpose grime effects. The staining is not too overwhelming, it dries and controls perfectly and feels incredibly familiar, yet original on its own. Next up we have Carrion Crimson, and here we start to get a little bit more technical. I do the same thing as before, so I thin down with some mineral spirits and mix it well in my tin cup. The first thing I notice is that the wash has these stray pigments separated from the mix. I wonder how I can use them. Well, we'll see that later. So I apply it where I feel a crimson wash should be, so typically under armpits, elbows and neck, and in this case around boils and warmer areas. I let this dry and come with a flat, clean brush to feather the crimson into the Goon's Grime beneath. They mix perfectly and create smooth transitions. I come again with a second pass just to reinforce some areas, and this time I let this deposit more in the recesses. So now it's dry again, and as I start to remove it back, I notice that where the wash was deposited more heavily, we have this automatic satin to almost gloss finish. It already looks disgusting as it should be. So Carrion Crimson creates automatic surface finish variation, and even if you mix it with mineral spirits, it will dry mostly satin or wet looking. All I do is just blend, remove here and there, and try working the colors out with a clean brush, while also creating a texture with every brush stroke. The richness in surface finish variation and texture is absolutely insane. You get all these veins and dots as well as you remove the wash with mineral spirits or blend it with Goon's Grime. That's 10 minutes of work. Absolutely incredible wash for Grimdark flesh applications. Okay, so next up is Dystopian Brown. I apply it diluted with mineral spirits and cover the entire miniature with it, paying attention to not let the wash pull up in the crevices too much. After it's dry, I proceed with a reductive technique. This builds up very mild and slowly, and looks like a sort of darker and desaturated version of Reichland Flesh Shade, So I think it's gonna be a great unifying wash for human flesh, creatures, or just a warm brown filter. This is the paint that made me freak out the first time, as I applied it super heavy, undiluted, with my first test model. It dried satin in all the recesses. It was not covering the model as I expected, and my reaction wasn't very positive. But again, all I needed was just a change in perspective. You just have to treat these inks more like acrylic washes that can be removed and worked out. Once this concept clicks in your head, everything falls into place. Perfect, so next is Coelia Green. Exactly as Carrion Crimson, this paint has some little grains and stray pigments floating around. It dries satin no matter how you dilute it, and it's intended to be a flesh wash. A word of warning, this pigment is a powerhouse, so don't go crazy with it. Just the tip of the brush, with a small amount of pigment, will go a long way. See how it's basically glazing the skin without effort, and it's giving immediately a cold sensation. So when dry, I remove it with mineral spirits, and I notice that it's quite hard to get rid of. So this paint will stain your surfaces immediately and thoroughly, will dry on the satin side, and will give you a slightly grainy effect. That's a cool flash wash, but let's see what happens if I use Carrion Crimson over it. Of course, let's remember that these paints will reactivate on top of each other, so you can layer them, but you must be very careful and not exaggerate with quantities. So I let this dry with a blow dryer and come in again, first with a Q-tip to absorb the excess, then with a brush for feathering and blending. And here, look at the amount of mottling and complexity of the skin, with just 2 washes applied and worked out with a clean brush. Normally, to achieve an effect like this, I would have to go through spattering, oil mottling, stuff like that. But here, it's just a couple of passes of washes, removal, and some stippling and blending with a brush. Let's try Decay of Death. This one was diluted with just a brushful of mineral spirits and applied quite liberally and let it pool. So let's see how it dries after a dozen of seconds under the blow dryer. It's a very mild decay effect. It looks cool on clothes and metal or wood to replicate rot and decay. At first, I was worried that I wasn't applying this the right way. Now, after using it on multiple occasions, I actually think I really like this more subtle effect. However, in my opinion, it could be a little bit more punchy than it is, more heavily pigmented. Next is what I guess what you've been waiting for, Ichor of the Damned. This is a deep black wash with some brown undertones. This paint also freaked me out initially because I went on a model undiluted, no mixing, and I slapped it on crevices super heavy. It doesn't work like that. This needs some dilution with mineral spirits, and you apply it with deliberate passes. If you want it super deep, you just layer a second or a third pass after it's dried and feather it out. It's a powerful black wash that can create deep shadows and contrast. I guess it's perfect for pin washes, especially with lots of mineral spirits, so it flows nicely in the recesses in a capillary action. The last paint is Sector Rust. a rust color enamel wash. Applied, as always, mixed with some mineral spirits. It reads correctly, like a rust stain effect, and when dry it looks pretty great, but I think even this one is too mild, too gentle. A paint like this, in my opinion, should be much more aggressive, like having more power in terms of coverage. I have to build this up like 2 or 3 times to really see the effect. It's there, but it takes some work to really see it. So now let's quickly go to our second part of the test, airbrush application. For this test, I'm going to use this miniature from Trench Crusade. It was simply primed in black, grey and white. I come with a unifying pass of Goon's Grime through the airbrush, and I notice it goes really smooth, but I added just a drop of mineral spirits to aid the matte finish. It covers the miniature nicely and evenly, but it's not too aggressive. It builds up rather slowly. After 10 seconds under the blow dryer, I come with a Q-tip, slightly damp in mineral spirits, and proceed to remove the wash, cleaning away all the open surfaces and leaving it mostly in recesses. Now for the skin, I want a mottled effect, so I get a wide, clean and soft brush and start to modulate the wash and move the pigments around, creating like these irregular blotches and textures. I dry it again, and manually I add some Coelia Green to tint the surface. I want a cold skin that resembles the original illustration for this character. So it's time to dry it, remove the majority of the Coelia Green, and pass the blow dryer again. And I still have the opportunity to come with a clean brush and modulate the surfaces. See that we still got some remnants of that Goon's Grime beneath, and we can gradually mix them with the Coelia Green, getting all this diversity and interest. And now I come with Carrion Crimson through the airbrush, with just a drop of mineral spirits, and I pass this from below like an undershade. This builds up very slowly, so I come with 2 to 3 layers, very lightly sprayed. And as it dries, I start noticing something. All those stray pigments we've seen earlier have deposited on the surface, creating this insanely detailed and mottled effect, with a satin finish. I think there's a way to make them appear or not appear at all, even with a manual application. It will just take me some more experimentation, but I'm sure there's a way to control this. And at this point, all I have to do is just consider if they're a little bit too much, and in that case, just remove them with a Q-tip and mineral spirits, or embrace them and move them around, and simply work them out with a clean brush exactly as before, to create this incredible and visceral effect. Now you may notice the area around the helmet and rifle there has turned satin. Well, that is the overspray of the Carrion Crimson through the airbrush. So I simply come with a Q-tip and mineral spirits and remove it. And now it's properly looking matte as intended. I fell in love with this combination of washes. Of course, you could come over this with acrylics, oils, and do whatever you want when it's dry. Again, just keep in mind that these work like oils, so I don't advise to stack too many layers on top of each other while not fully cured. You would risk reactivating all the layers beneath and turn it into an unreadable mess. So if you want to stack more than 3 enamel washes, I'd recommend creating a save state, either with a polyurethane varnish a thin acrylic layer through Airbrush or a glue technique, so that you can keep working on top with no concern. These are just test models, so I won't put all my effort. And for the purpose of the test, I won't go too crazy adding other paints. But you can see how quickly I can paint this miniature and make it look cool by adding some Decay of Death, Sector Rust, and Ichor of the Damned. The Trench Crusade miniature took me around 35 minutes. These other figures were also achieved in a similar time frame, if not less. Like this church giant from the Bloodborne miniature game. For the time and effort put into these, I'd say the results are pretty damn good. So my final verdict for Villainy Inks is that the range overall is just great. I was a little bit thrown off at the start because I was stuck in a certain mentality. I was trying so hard to see them for what they're not, as they're simply not straight out copies of other brands. There's a surprising amount of engineering behind these paints, a specific vision, and the more I work with them, the more this is apparent to me. They are versatile, technical, and definitely have a learning curve. I wouldn't say Villainy Inks are necessarily substitutes for other products. Well, maybe I could say that for Goon's Grime and Ichor of the Damned. They are the best equivalents I've tried so far for a Grime enamel and a black wash respectively. While Carrion Crimson and Coelia Green, the flesh washes, are revolutionary. There's nothing to compare them with currently on the market. Definitely a must-have in my opinion. As for all the other colors, I think they have a distinct identity, use and application. They just work differently than other brands, so I think they can just coexist in our hobby collection. What I can say from a constructive criticism perspective is that while I appreciate the long and forgiving working time they offer, it's perhaps even too much. My first critique is that I'd like to see Villainy Inks dry much faster. Sometimes they will stay wet in the recesses, even after multiple passes of blow dryer. I mean, maybe it's just me, maybe I just need some more time figuring out the correct mixes, but sometimes I feel like I'm spending too much time drying the miniatures. And as for these specific paints, I say that the Decay of Death and Sector Rust would need some fine-tuning to make them a little bit more punchy, more pigmented, and in line with the great personality that is showcased by the other colors in the range. So, in the coming weeks, I'll take the time to study Villainy Inks more in depth, collect your feedback, and create specific demonstration videos for each and every single color of the line. Let us know in the comments if you received your Villainy Inks, and feel free to share your experience. I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it interesting and informative. So take care, and we will catch you in the next.